Good morning. Welcome all to this circle. As we gather here this morning, we are spiritual seekers united in community. As we gather in this place, we find our place, and we know that we belong. While we're seeking to live out a more generous and expansive spirituality, we build community with one another. A community not about beliefs, but about living fully, embracing beauty, loving deeply. We affirm together that what matters most is who we are, how we treat each other, how we work to make ourselves, our communities, and our world a better place. And we do that by welcoming the whole human family to be, as they say, radically inclusive, and to recognize that that means giving something of ourselves as we welcome all ages, all colors, all sizes, all cultures, all genders, all sexualities, all religions, or none. And so we welcome each other to this circle. We gather with gratitude for this place that we now sit, whether we gather here in Edmonton, whether we gather with SSUC Saskatoon this morning. We recognize that we sit here in the reality that is ancient and beautiful land, part of our Mother Earth, sacred in its very existence, and we acknowledge that we're together on this Treaty 6 land with our brothers and sisters, our Métis friends, all those Indigenous people who have called this their ancestral and adopted home, and we find honor in expressing our gratitude and living our commitments to peace, to reconciliation, to compassion, to relationship. A special welcome to those gathering in Saskatoon this morning. A group, as you can see pictured there, a group gathered this morning for breakfast, and then and now are meeting with us live as they join us. So welcome to you, SSUC Saskatoon. If you all would turn, we might give a little wave to the camera at the back. Hello, Saskatoon. We have some upcoming activities and life within the community that we wish to share this morning, and I know
we place light in our midst as a symbol of our intention to live in ways that seek light, in ways that reflect light, and in ways that honor the light in one another. We light this candle today to focus our attention to live into the best of our humanness, to turn toward better words, better ways, deeper courage, greater compassion. In this light, we seek to strengthen our intention to live in the graced light of kindness, gentleness, integrity, and the deeper living that can come with deeper listening. We gather in this space knowing that we are many lights, and together we come to strengthen the light within each of us and the light we can be as a collective community.
Many lights
Our Time for All Ages is next. I invite anyone who wants to come for a story and a chat on the carpet. Come forward now. Come on. I Have a Little Problem, Said the Bear, is the name of this book by Heinz Janisch, and the artwork is by Silke Leffler. I have a little problem, said the bear. You see, Of course, said the inventor. I know exactly what you need. A heavy bear like you needs something to make him feel lighter. I have just the thing. He got a pair of wings from his workshop and fastened them to the bear's shoulders. Said the bear. Then he shrugged and went along looking worried. I have a little problem, said the bear. You see, indeed I do, said the tailor. Your wings are very handsome, but you need a scarf. And he wound a long scarf around the bear's neck. Oh, said the bear. Then he shrugged and went along looking worried. I have a little problem, said the bear. I'm just the man you're looking for, said the hatter. Now don't say a word. I have just the thing for you. And he placed a fine hat on the bear's head. Said the bear. Then he shrugged and he went along looking worried. Do you see the hat that he got on his head? It's quite a hat. I have a little problem, said the bear. I can tell that just by looking at you, said the doctor. My special vitamins will have you fit as a fiddle in no time. He handed the bear a box of vitamins. Take one every morning. Said the bear. Then he shrugged and went along looking worried. I have a little, said the bear. Problem, said the street vendor, but I have the cure. This little charm will bring you good luck wherever you go. And he hung a silver pig on a chain around the bear's neck. Said the bear. Then he shrugged and he went along looking worried. Said the bear. Well, I can see that you have a problem, said the eye doctor. That's why I'm here. She placed a pair of glasses on the bear's nose. Now, isn't that better? Okay, said the bear. Then he shrugged and went along looking worried. Said the bear. A little problem, said the shopkeeper. Well, never you worry, my dear. This honey will sweeten up your life in no time. And she handed the bear a jar of honey. Said the bear. Then he shrugged and went along looking worried. I wonder how long this is going to go on for. I, said the bear. You have a problem, said the shoemaker. You need boots. She pulled a pair of boots from the box, put them on the bear, and these are the best boots I have, a perfect fit. Said the bear, and he wandered off. At the top of the hill, the bear stopped. He looked back over the town and shook his head. He was worn out. Well, look at all the stuff he has on now. The bear unfastened his wings. He took off his hat and his scarf. He took off his glasses and the pig on a chain, and he kicked off his boots. He set his vitamins and honey on the ground. Then he sat down on the hill and sighed. What's the matter? Asked a fly on a blade of grass beside him. I don't want to talk about it, said the bear. No one listens to me. I'm listening, said the fly. Tell me about it. I have a little problem, said the bear. The fly didn't say anything. You see, I'm afraid of the dark, alone in my cave, the bear continued. There are no other bears for miles around, and I don't know anyone who wants to sleep in my cave with me. I dread the darkness all day long. That really is a problem, said the fly, but I have a solution. It just so happens that I'm looking for somewhere to live. A bear's cave sounds very cozy. I could move in with you. What do you say? Said the bear. I feel better already. So the fly hopped onto the bear's shoulder, where she made herself comfortable. And off they went together, looking happy. Oh. Do you remember what's the difference with the fly from everyone else the bear met? What did the fly do? Do you remember? Right. The bear said, "I have a little problem," and the fly didn't say anything. What did she do instead? She listened. Yes, she did. And that is very important. It was the most important thing in this story. The whole story was about the fly listening eventually to the bear. And the bear felt happy that finally he had someone that would listen. Do you know, sometimes when we are with friends or with our family, lots of people have problems. They're like the bear. I have a problem. And we don't have to know the answers to the problem. And we don't have to have the solutions. We don't always have to know what to say. There's only one thing that we really need to do to be a good friend, and that is, like the fly, to listen, to make someone feel like they can tell you. That's being a good friend. So thank you, bear, and thank you, fly, for reminding us that listening is what helps to make us very good friends, very good family members, very good people in the world. So, I wonder if you'll have...
In just a moment, we're going to listen to a video that's about 9 minutes long, so settle in and be comfortable. These are the words of a young man by the name of Andrew Forceful. After he graduated from Middlebury College in 2011, he wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life. He was a young man with a college education, but no job and no sense of who he was or what he wanted to be in the world. So he made a decision to walk out his mother's back door and walk 4,000 miles across the United States to get to the Pacific Ocean, or as far as his money would take him. And he carried a backpack that had 3 words on it: walking to listen. And he shares a little bit of the story of the end of his journey. I commend his website to you, and you'll find lots of stories that he shared of individuals he met along the way. But this is how his journey made its completion.
Hear this short piece of wisdom from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7. Jesus returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, through the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they besought him to lay his hand upon him. And taking him aside from the multitude privately, Jesus put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. And looking up to heavens, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, be opened. And his ears were opened, and his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. In this story passed down to us in the Jesus tradition, may we find wisdom for our living.
Hearing can be really hard even when you're not hard of hearing. I can't even begin to understand the science of it. What is it that enables air to pass through vocal cords in such a way that it causes those vibrations we make in our throats to travel through the air in sound waves and be received into this weird-shaped canal with a drum in it? so that something that has been said is also something that is heard. Several years ago, I was asked to be on a listening panel. It was a panel that was created to respond to a congregation in crisis. Together with two and the hopes of any member of that spiritual community that wanted to speak to us. And I had to train myself out of the habits of hearing into the very different discipline of listening. I'd come to this with all kinds of experiences of hearings, those vehicles that we've developed to resolve disputes, where the task is to really enforce certain established rules into regards to what will be heard and what will not be heard, and then to weigh the evidence that you've heard and decide an issue. And the outcome of those kinds of hearings is invariably there are winners and there are losers. We identify who's at fault, or we apportion degrees of fault between different players. But this was a different task. This wasn't about arriving at some kind of decision or making a judgment. This task wasn't about assigning responsibility for the crisis. This was about listening. It wasn't about hearing with our ears and using our minds to process what we heard. This was about listening. It was about hearing for healing. So it was about hearing with more than our ears. It meant creating a situation of trust and an atmosphere of caring that would let people speak their perceptions into a kind of deep listening, with the hopes that those who spoke would also feel heard. And that somehow that miracle of feeling heard might help healing to happen. Our need to be heard is just about as primal as our need to eat. And our first relationships arise out of someone hearing our cry. And as sophisticated and complicated as our relationships in life might become, they're always rooted in our need to hear and our need to be heard. This quirky little first century story Chris read for us a moment ago has been traveling with me all week. If I come to it with my literal ears, it's very easy for me to dismiss it. Easy for me to smile at the writer's detail of having Jesus stick his fingers in the ears of a complete stranger and then spit on the guy's tongue and look up and sigh. And I feel like I'm inside some kind of comic strip. This string of silly or symbolic acts. And then only in the story does the story have anything for Jesus to say to this complete stranger after all these strange little actions. And I expect him to say, "I'm sorry, I don't know why I did that." These are kind of weird things to do to a complete stranger. But since this is likely a parable about Jesus, a story that uses hearing as a metaphor for a community that had found meaning in the stories and experiences their elders had passed down to them, stories of a teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, who'd been executed some 40 years or so earlier than this story. Those first hearing this story are those who have found a new way to make meaning in their lives from the teachings of Jesus. A new way to imagine a different social order, And this miracle of having had their ears opened has taken them on a new spiritual path. So this story only gives Jesus 2 words to say. Be opened. Be opened. Maybe that's their explanation, those first hearers of the story, for why it was they weren't finding a welcome in the synagogue anymore. And they're beginning to form spiritual community in a new way with each other. They were a community born in a time when their empire wasn't listening. It wasn't listening to what they were saying about poverty. It wasn't interested in hearing about the policies that weren't working. The empire wasn't interested in hearing about those who weren't benefiting from its expansion. This fledgling little Jesus community, to which stories like those Mark is telling were written, was a community born out of the revolutionary act of hearing and being heard. They've been open to something that radically changed the way they hear themselves, the way they hear life. Almost 6 years ago now, I had an experience that taught me something about the miracle of listening. I wasn't walking across our country like Andrew. I was flying across our country, returning home from Ottawa, where I had been chairing meetings for the Church Council on Justice and Corrections. And over the previous few days, I had heard a lot of words, a lot of opinions, even a few ideas, a lot of feelings. And I was so weary of words when I got on the plane, and the thought of just luxuriating in silence for the next 3 hours. I didn't have a sign on my backpack that said, "Flying to listen." But you know what happened. I had a highly extroverted seatmate who was returning home to Edmonton too, after his experience of participating in the National Day of Honor that had paid tribute to Afghan veterans. He was a soldier who had been injured in Afghanistan some years earlier, and he had been chosen to carry the last Canadian flag that had been flown in the base in Kandahar in a relay that had made its way through 6 cities and had ended in Ottawa on Friday, May the 9th in 2014. He was coming from the experience of the deep pride that he had felt in presenting that flag to our Prime Minister. And he was exhilarated by the expressions of support he felt in the communities all along the way, from the crowds on the hill for the National Day of Honor ceremonies. And his spirits were high from having been with the families of soldiers who hadn't come home. And he felt this sense of responsibility, having survived. He was to be a son to those parents who had lost their own children. As I listened to his life, to the journey that took him into the military, to the experience of watching 4 of his closest friends die beside him in Afghanistan, as I heard his journey with PTSD, his struggle of having survived when his buddies died, the story of the 3 years it took him to find the courage to risk having spinal surgery to address the pain and the disability that had risen out of his own injuries. As he spoke, I kept meeting the wisdom of that quirky first-century story. I was being invited to be opened beyond my opinions, beyond my own politics, even to be opened beyond the deeply held values that shape my pacifism, my convictions about war and about nonviolence. I was being invited to listen beyond and underneath all that shapes my ideals and open to the experience of another person, an experience very different than mine. I was being invited to remove my filters and somehow feel what I heard. And in some sense, isn't this always what listening asks of us? And I'll tell you from that experience, I know it to be as uncomfortable as having someone stick their fingers in your ear and spit on your tongue. Because as much as I delight in the gift of hearing, in the distinct song of the birds, in the miracle of the sounds of music, in the familiarity of a voice I'd know anywhere, in the sounds of waves breaking, as much as I delight in the gift of hearing, listening is hard. Because to truly risk listening is to risk being opened. To being open to what we don't want to hear. To being opened to unwelcome news that changes and rearranges our lives. To realities that are painful. To difficult truths. To ideas that challenge our own. To experiences we wouldn't wish on anyone. We risk hearing what's happening in our bodies and to our planet and to our climate. We risk hearing what's happening to friends and strangers, to habitat, to our animals, to our plants. And there is so much that is hard to hear. And even though our ears might be open for business, the temptation is to close our hearts. To hold the hearing inside our ears without letting it get to our hearts. So that we hear without having to listen. Without having to feel what we hear. The wisdom of that quirky ancient story travels with us again and again in our lives, whether it's in listening to our own lives or it's in listening to each other in ways that challenge us to be opened. And even though we might hear through little openings on the sides of our head, listening really takes our whole being. I've said this to you many times before, and I will say it many times again. Imagine what could happen if our hearts could hear what our ears hear. We'd have more liberation and less oppression. We'd have more justice and less charity. We'd have more sharing and less hunger. We'd have more giving and less accumulating. We'd have more one world and less first world. We'd have more respect for diversity and less tolerance for discrimination. We'd have more peace and less war. We'd have more conversation and less contempt. If our hearts could hear what our ears hear, we'd have more understanding and less prejudice. We'd have more empathy and we'd have fewer opinions. We'd have more questions and fewer answers. We'd have more mutuality and less domination. We'd have more love and less fear. We'd know a whole lot less, and we'd feel a whole lot more. And we'd cry more, and we'd laugh longer. If our species is going to survive, the evolutionary genius of survival might have to begin to make some kind of evolutionary mutation to our human anatomy. Because the survival of the human species and the well-being of the more than human may well depend on shortening the distance between our ears and our hearts. Listening doesn't really take two ears that hear perfectly. It takes a heart that hears perfectly. To live more deeply is to listen more intently, knowing that we risk being opened. We risk being changed. We pray as a way of strengthening our intentions. We offer these words together as our prayer. Into this time, we take our place to listen to what is beyond words. We gather seeking comfort in the midst of our losses, to share what we've found to be true, to shoulder our burdens together, to find wisdom for the path before us, to pursue justice where walls shut out the light, to find peace where we are anxious. We pray as those seeking to listen deeply, and find wisdom for our living. May it be so. I'm not sure I get the science of hearing, but I kind of think I get the math of listening. One mouth, 2 ears. There must be at least twice as much to hear as there is to say. We go to be those who hear with more than our ears, those who hear with our hearts. We go together to give the kind of deep listening our world so desperately needs.